A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time is ticking on your chance to win the Great British Giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Didn't quite believe it and still can't. And if I can win it, anybody can win it.
For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats, and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the Chancellor of the Exchequer today held consultations on the introduction of a carbon levy on goods imported from lower-cost countries. Why does that matter? It'll make you poorer and tie Britain into permanent realignment with the Brussels bureaucracy. The chairman of Dorset's Fire and Rescue Authority described her own force as institutionally racist. But when my fellow GB News presenter, Lee Anderson, asked her to explain herself, she said she would have to get back to him. We'll be delving into institutional racism with Femi Nylander. A report has recommended the WASPy women receive compensation. But don't people have some responsibility for their own financial affairs? Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond. We expect you to check your privilege. We'll be revealing that Britain's top spy chief is so scared of the lovies of The Guardian that he's taken time off Twitter to write a series of grovelling emails to his staff. I'll also be joined by my most intellectual panel, former Conservative MP and commentator Paul Goodman and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. As you know, I want to hear from you too. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite part of the day, the news from Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that the Irish Government Minister Simon Harris has thrown his hat into the ring to become Ireland's next Taoiseach, announcing he'll put his name forward to become the next leader of Fine Gael first. It comes a day after Leo Varadkar's announcement that he was standing down and would step aside as Taoiseach once his successor was appointed. If he's appointed Fine Gael leader, Mr Harris would expected to be formally elected in April and would become the country's youngest Premier at the age of 37. The Bank of England held the interest rate at 5.25% today for the fifth time in a row. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey said the economy wasn't yet at the point where rates could be lowered, but said things were moving in the right direction. Inflation is expected to fall below 2% by the summer, but the Bank of England said the conflict in the Middle East and disruption to commercial shipping in the Red Sea risked further price surging. As you've been hearing, thousands of women born in the 1950s may be eligible for compensation after a report found that the Department for Work and Pensions failed to adequately inform them that the state pension age was changing. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman looked at potential injustices resulting from the decision to raise women's retirement age to bring it in line with men's in 2010. Well, the Women Against State Pension Inequality campaign, or WASPI as it's known, is suggesting there should be £10,000 for each victim in compensation, claiming that women weren't properly warned about the changes. Number 10 said today it's dealing with a migration emergency after a record number of asylum seekers crossed the English Channel yesterday. 514 illegal migrants were picked up by Border Force officials, the highest number this year. And today, at least another 300 migrants have arrived across the Channel in 6 small boats. The government hopes to get its Rwanda bill into law by April the 18th. And today, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, said that he's determined to deliver on the government's pledge to stop the boats. And lastly, Sir Keir Starmer has joined the growing backlash against the Football Association and Nike for changing the St George's flag on the new England football kit in an interview with The Sun. Nike and England have ditched the traditional red and white cross on the collar and replaced it with a navy blue and purple stripe, a move which Lee Anderson also criticised yesterday. US manufacturer Nike insisted what they've called the playful update was meant to unite and inspire fans for this year's Euros. But the Labour leader says the original colours were unifying and called the St George symbol something to be proud of. That's your top stories. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Jacob.
The green ideology is set to make a whole range of goods more expensive. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will press ahead with plans to introduce tariffs on goods imported from countries that are not self-harming their industries with green regulations. These taxes will be called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms, CBAMs, as if by giving it some complex acronym it will be less nasty than it is. It is higher costs for consumers. And it will initially include a range of goods from carbon-intensive industries such as aluminium, cement, ceramics and steel. But as we all know, red tape expands to meet the demands of red tape. And as these items are the raw materials for so much else, many more goods will inevitably be included. This will make you poorer and lower our standards of living. Economists have predicted that CBAMs will take 1.5% of GDP per capita over a 5-year period, which is about £600 per person. We are, in effect, intentionally harming our economy and increasing the cost of living in Britain in order to encourage other countries to adopt a high-cost green ideology. His Majesty's government needs to remember that it exists to act in the interests of the British people, not to operate as a kind of pan-global Toynbee Hall mission, proselytising an elite faith in environmentalism to countries and societies deemed insufficiently pious. In addition, our CBAM plans are almost a carbon copy of those already drawn up by the European Union. It is a stealthy and undemocratic attempt to realign this country, the United Kingdom, by applying exactly the same type of EU laws that we hated when we were a member state. Indeed, Opposition to those laws was part of the reason we voted to leave. As Lord Frost has said, this is not taking back control, this is the government giving it up voluntarily, abdicating. We must protect the pockets of British consumers and reverse this drift towards de facto realignment with the EU. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by my most intellectual panel of former Conservative MP and commentator Paul Goodman and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, why would a government want to attack its own consumers in this way?
Well, you could always see it as an opportunity. I'm not quite sure which bit you object to more, whether it's the fact that the movement towards net zero or the fact that we're taking something from Brussels. But either way, if you looked at this from a different end of the telescope, if we get this right, we get net zero right, we become green technology leaders in this country, businesses could end up making £1 trillion. That's this government's estimate of the kind of money that would come from that kind of thing. That's the direction of travel in the rest of the world. We've got to catch up. As far as the specific thing goes, a tax on foreign steel would mean our steel would be more attractive to buy. Same with glass. Same with ceramics, all the various things that this would actually apply to.
But protectionism never works. We've seen this from history. And we've already destroyed our steel industry by our mad green policies. Now we're saying to consumers, we've destroyed our industry, so we are going to make your costs permanently higher. This just damages the growth opportunities for the UK economy.
But you don't see this as a way of actually getting economic growth?
No, it's definitely not.
It would be if we get if £1 trillion worth more business came into Britain. It would be.
You never get £1 trillion from making trade more difficult. Anything that makes trade more difficult makes countries poorer.
But the £1 trillion come from us exporting our materials to the rest of the world.
But they're not going to, because our materials will be more expensive. So the countries that don't do this...
The playing field is being levelled. That's the whole point of the tax.
It's not. The EU and the UK may do this, but China and India and America aren't going to do this. They're going to trade with each other at lower prices, leaving us as a high-cost, failing region.
But the material that we're bringing into this country, once they've got tariffs on, will make our domestic industries more attractive.
That's the argument of the protectionists throughout the centuries, and it makes your industry less efficient because they have no incentive to make themselves more efficient, and you have higher costs for consumers. Therefore, everything you manufacture here has a higher cost base.
Well, but what was happening under the present system? I mean, if we join the EU emissions trading scheme like Norway and Iceland and Switzerland, we wouldn't have this we wouldn't have the problem we're talking about now. But because of the UK emissions trading scheme, we had manufacturers taking their production abroad where they could actually make it cheaper.
I agree, that was a completely crazy scheme, and we should have abolished that. The thing we need to do is get rid of the green regulations.
This does abolish it. That's the whole point of it.
No, without CBAMs, we just get rid of all these charges so that industry can be efficient and low cost. But I'd better bring Paul in. Surely you're going to support free markets rather than this effort.
Well, you're taking the Gladstone side of the debate. Nigel's taking the Disraeli side of the debate.
The Disraeli change.
Not at first.
Not at first.
And there's this trade-off in conservative thought between one and the other. But I won't dwell on that. My view is that this policy has been deliberately invented to rile you up. Because, as Nigel said, it's a fatal combination of net zero, which seems to irritate you unduly, and not realising the gains of Brexit, which drives you to even greater sort of reserves of anger. I mean, I'm just finding myself thinking at this point that the great Nigel Lawson, admittedly a flawed chancellor in some ways, but quite a considerable force, he was in fact in favour of a straightforward carbon tax. You would tax it domestically, you would tax anything that came in. Presumably, because lots of people would have to pay more tax, there'd be some social security distribution. I find that quite striking from someone who is thought of as a sceptic about global warming.
Well, he thought of it as a means to raise money if you wanted to make carbon adjustments rather than just putting it on everybody.
That's true. He also recognised there was a need to make carbon adjustments.
He thought that there might be costs from global warming, which it was better to ameliorate rather than to decimate the economy. To misuse the word decimate, which will have people writing in, including me, probably.
Yes. So I'm just wondering if that way of thinking about it. I mean, no politician's ever going to do it. I mean, this is this would be a new tax. Politicians always argue if you get a new tax, you'll get rid of some old ones. That somehow never seems to happen. Never happens. So it's not. It doesn't seem to be a runner. But I wonder if it'd be a more rational way of dealing with the problem than most of the policy we have at the moment.
This just seems to me to be a plan to make Europe and the UK, by buying into it, less efficient and less globally competitive, because other people just aren't bothering. If you look at the last 15, 20 years, Europe and the UK have reduced emissions significantly. Nobody else has.
Yes. I mean, some people argue that the Chinese are getting into green technology in a very big way at the same time, of course, as they're spending a lot on coal. So I'm not sure that it'd be right to say that the rest of the world's just cheerfully going to carry on.
But their emissions still rising.
Of course.
But with China, that even a small change in China does more for the climate than a big change in Britain, which is always the Chinese argument, that they've got an awful lot more industry they've got to actually green up first.
Yeah, but they're still adding more emissions than we produce in a whole year.
Yes, of course, yes, but they're bigger.
Yeah, but they're still growing their economy by not taking any real notice of this. They play lip service to it, but they're not really.
Their argument would be that they are making changes, but they may not be as big a change as the West would like, but they're still doing more than, say, Britain is doing. Well, whatever Britain is doing, their change will matter more.
Well, thank you very much to my panel. Coming up, was the chairman of the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Authority playing with fire when she accused her own institution of racism?
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So after his mad dash to see his father last week, Prince Harry predictably went on TV to talk about it. He gave his first interview to Good Morning America, whilst apparently being filmed by a crew that were doing a documentary on the Invictus Games. He didn't disclose his father's diagnosis, but frankly, even the fact that he was on TV talking about it was concerning. No wonder they're keeping him at arm's length. This is what he said.
How did you get the news that the King was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
He also said that he loves his family, but then he said that he had his own family in America. So which family does he love? The late Queen's last few years of life were marred with accusations of racism, which Harry later backtracked on, claiming that they hadn't actually used the word, so inadvertently admitting to gaslighting us all. But the Sussex's stock is falling in the States, and the only thing that makes them interesting is their proximity to the royal family. And now the King is ill, Harry has even offered to muck in and take on official duties to help his father. Look, I want to see reconciliation and love and joy, but I'm afraid Meghan has yet to even speak to her father as far as we know, and Harry didn't apparently even reach out to his brother. Whilst his dad might fall for it, I doubt William will be as soft. Good luck with that, Harry.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, the mailmogs have been on fire. Steve says, why are we making ourselves poorer when China, India and South America are building coal power stations every day? And Tess says, how many more taxes are we going to pay? How long before Labour starts taxing our flights? And Alison, tell Nigel that this taxpayer does not want to make herself poorer so big industries can make trillions. We've had enough of making rich people richer while we can't eat or stay warm. And Mick says enough. Green taxes are just an excuse to get more money out of the already stretched taxpayer. Well, I agree with all of those views. The mailmogs and I are at one. Yesterday, the chairman of the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Authority, Fire Brigade as they used to be called, Rebecca Knox, struggled to back up her claim that there is institutional racism in her fire service. Lee Anderson questioned Knox during a Home Affairs Committee meeting after a report found an underlying culture of misogyny and sexism, as well as systemic discrimination within the fire service. Well, Mr. Anderson put the cat among the pigeons, something he quite likes doing, after she seemingly got confused about institutional racism was, after she agreed with the findings of the report.
Just a couple of quick questions, please, for Councillor Rebecca Knox. I think you was in agreement that your force was institutionally racist. Is that correct?
I agreed with the report, the independent report, and so did the Chief Fire Officer accept the findings.
Okay, so can you please tell me, Councillor, what unfair advantages white people have in your force?
I would hope not. None. Not advantages. Did I hear you?
Yeah, do they have any advantages?
No.
So then how can you be institutionally racist?
Sorry, I might have to get back to you.
Well, there we go. The accusation of institutional racism shouldn't be taken lightly, and a person making those statements without the ability to answer routine questions of it isn't really the right person to be carrying out that office. So joining me now is activist and political commentator Femi Nylander. Femi, as always, welcome back. It seems to me that racism is an individual thing, and that when you say it's institutional, you're taking the blame away from people who are racist and spreading it so that nobody gets blamed. And it's actually unhelpful rather than helpful.
Not at all. I mean, racism can be an individual thing. I can call someone the P word or the N word, but racism can also be embedded in institutions. I think this lady has shown herself to be somewhat incompetent because she obviously couldn't produce the results of the report, but other people have read the report. I've even glanced over the report. I was asked to come today, I glanced over, and there's plenty of examples of egregious examples of racism throughout the service, the fire service. In that report, I think one black fireman had a noose put around his locker. Another fireman from a Muslim background had pork rubbed on his plate before he went to eat.
But that's disgraceful. And that if you just say it's institutional, you take the blame off the people who've done it wrong, the people who've done these individual actions, and you say, well, it's not really about individuals, it's just the whole organisation, which isn't true, because there will be lots of people in that brigade who are not racist, including the leadership, who want to get rid of racism amongst individuals within the organisation. And I just think it makes it harder for them if you take this blanket institutional racism, sort of easy get-out clause.
Not really, because if you look at the UK, there's plenty of institutions in the UK where it's very, very clear that the institution itself has problems, and that's why in the UK we have stop and search rates that are so much higher for black people. That's why in the UK we have these problems with attainments in results, because teachers aren't giving black students what they need, they're not addressing their issues, they're not talking to them about their problems, and they're not aware of what's going on in their communities. I mean, the idea that you can take away even if you look at the misogyny part of the report, there are women in that report that mention the fact that they tell their friends not to invite firefighters over for routine kind of practice inspections because they expect that those firefighters might fiddle through their drawers and look at their knickers. That's in the report. And so if a lady who has links to the force is saying that she would tell people not to do that because she expects that to happen, then it's obviously a problem. Which is, and would you extend that with all your? I know GB News doesn't have that many minority views, but all the women at home, would you tell them that it's impossible for an institution to be misogynistic? But that's the question. Would you tell them that it's impossible for any institution to be misogynistic and only individuals can be misogynistic?
Again, I think it's individuals. Individuals create society rather than the other way around. And that if you just say the institution is misogynistic, again, you're avoiding the blame and dealing with the problem.
Institutions influence individuals.
If there are people who go through people's private clothing when they're visiting them, that's just ghastly, that's revolting and perverted.
But this is the point. The report says that it's...
But that's not an institution. There will be nobody in the fire brigade who says that is a good thing. There will be nobody who thinks that is acceptable way for people to behave.
The report says that it's something which is almost... which they laugh about, which they laugh about amongst themselves. If that sort of things happen,
you have to root out the individuals.
But if they're laughing about it together, then that's not an individual thing, is it?
I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of the aim. It's just the means of getting there. And I think the institutional word is a great way for bureaucrats to say, oh, it's an institutional problem, so let's not worry about the details. But we're going to go on to the Metropolitan Police, because they have bought into internalised racism too. New videos have surfaced that show serving officers and police outreach teams, whatever that might mean, saying the kind of thing one would expect to hear from lefty lecturers. One outreach team member said that black women have to work much harder than their white counterparts. And one serving officer said he would not want to invalidate racial abuse he receives from ethnic minorities. Such statements, perhaps it's little wonder people are questioning if the police have abandoned enforcing the law without fear or favour. Let's have a look.
For example, being at a crime scene and they come and they insult you, you know that's not personal. I've learned that it's not personal. But I'm not going to invalidate them and say, no, that wasn't me. It wasn't me.
I mean, this seems to me, again, something where the police should be enforcing the law. If somebody abuses a police officer, that person should be arrested. It's not lawful to abuse police officers, and that gentleman on there shouldn't have to put up with people abusing him.
I mean, the police are very blatantly institutionally racist. They stop and search black people. I mean, this is the thing. Fire numbers are not actually a matter of governmental statistics. They don't gather the statistics on this. We know, for example, that more than 70 people died in the Grenfell fire, and that if it had been your £5 million mansion, I know you have lots of kids, but not that many people would have died. And we know that there were a lot of ethnic minorities that died in Grenfell because the ethnic minorities are generally poorer and live in these council estates and live in these flats that were not given the correct cladding. We know, anecdotally, that this was an issue of a lot of black people dying in a fire and Asian people dying in a fire because of the structural and institutional biases in this country, but we don't collect data on it. With the police, we do collect data. We know that the police stop and search black people at higher rates. We know that black people die in police custody at higher rates than white people. We know the institutional...
Aren't the rates of stop and search proportionate to the amount of crime that is being committed?
I mean,
particularly in terms of knife crime.
Well, let's leave knife crime to one side.
Well, no, knife crime's
we can talk about knife crime, but let's look at drug crime. Drug crime, white people don't take drugs less than black people, and yet stop and search results with reference to drugs are so much higher for black people. A black girl in a school was stopped and searched. She was under the age of 16, she was a minor, and they gave her an anal cavity search because they thought she had weed on her. She didn't. This is an institutional, structural... Do you condone that, Jacob? Of course you don't condone that, but you would say it's an individual thing. It's not.
I think powers should be used very carefully because the police have powers for the maintenance of law and order.
Should a 15-year-old girl be anally cavity searched because they think she has weed on her?
This entirely depends on the circumstances. That if the police have evidence...
but they didn't have evidence, and she didn't have weed.
Yeah, but that's the point.
So was it wrong?
I don't know the detailed circumstances. The police...
You condone that?
Hold on.
Just assume that I'm telling the truth. I may not be telling the truth. I can send you the article afterwards.
15-year-olds can commit crime.
She didn't have weed on her.
Actually...
She was in school.
Yes, but 15-year-olds can commit crime.
They can.
And we know, in terms of knife crime, that teenagers...
No, just please answer my question, Jacob. Is it wrong to anally cavity search a 15-year-old girl?
I can't possibly say about an individual circumstance, because...
You think it's fine to anally cavity search a 15-year-old girl in her school when she doesn't have weed on her because you think she might?
I think... that if there is evidence of crime, I can't talk about this individual case because obviously I don't know the details.
Assume that I'm telling the truth. If you give me a if you tell me something, I can assume you're telling the truth, and then I can answer based on that and say, but I don't know the details.
Hypotheticals are very dangerous.
Are you refusing? It's not hypothetical. It's a real case. Well, you just haven't read the.
I haven't got the full details. Nor have you actually.
I do have the details. I've read the evidence and researched the case quite.
Not fully available.
I know the basic details.
You know some of the details.
15-year-old girl had an anal cavity search on her because they thought she had weed. And she didn't.
But you're assuming that a 15-year-old. You're assuming that a 15-year-old cannot commit a crime.
No, a 15-year-old can commit crimes, but she didn't because they didn't find any weed on her.
But the police will inevitably carry out some searches where they don't find evidence.
To a black girl, a white girl? Has a white girl ever been anally cavity searched because they think they smell weed?
They're simply bound to have been searched.
Do you think a white girl in a school is bound to have been anally cavity searched because they assume she has weed on her? This is not. I mean, so in the black girl's case, you say, oh well, I don't know the details. It couldn't have happened. When I mention a white girl, you say it's bound to have happened.
It's bound to have happened because thousands of people.
Where is your head, Jacob?
Thousands of people are searched every year.
15-year-old girl in a school searched for weed. It's a very specific case.
The police need to be able to investigate crimes.
So this is Jacob Rees-Mogg. He cannot condemn a black girl being anally cavity searched.
Hold on. The police will make mistakes.
So do you say that was a mistake? I'm asking you.
It sounds like from what you're saying to me, it sounds like a terrible mistake.
That only took us 3 minutes.
But the police will make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that all stop and search is wrong or is racially motivated, which is what you're trying to say.
It does mean.
And you try and get away from...
I'm just moving it away from the knife crime side because the weed side is... We can talk about the knife crime
because knife crime is surely more serious.
Yeah, but if you look at areas in the UK, like Cornwall, where there's very little knife crime, black people are still much more likely to be stopped and searched.
So the problem of knife crime is primarily in London.
Exactly, but if you go outside of London, black people are still much more likely to be stopped and searched.
London is the biggest problem of knife crime, whereas there's a very high proportion of ethnic minorities.
And of course, if you want to deal with knife crime, you want to know the way to deal with knife crime? You put funding into programs that deal with it. You help black people get out of this cycle of poverty that they're in because of the structural inequalities.
It's not poverty that causes people to stab each other. No, it's not to stab
poverty
people.
Causes crime.
Well, why wasn't there more crime in the 1930s then, when people were much poorer?
In the 1930s, when people in general were poor, there was lots of crime in the UK in the 1930s.
There wasn't stabbing. There wasn't knife crime. There was not this type of murder. The murder rate was lower. This link between knife crime and poverty is simply bogus.
If you have youth services, if you have community-run youth services, if you have programs in place to make sure, even if you fund anti-gang initiatives,
or if you have police who arrest people rather than concentrating on being politically correct.
Why not answer my questions about Cornwall?
I have answered lots of your questions, but there's a statement from the Metropolitan Police.
The anal rape of a 15-year-old girl.
The Metropolitan Police spokesman says, "We are the most diverse we have ever been, but no, there is more to do. We will continue every effort to make sure we are attracting a workforce of the future that is as diverse as possible. We are equally committed to making the Metropolitan Police an inclusive place to work where all our people can thrive." You notice in that statement they say absolutely nothing about reducing crime and arresting criminals and employing people who will do that, which seems to me to be their main task. Thank you very much, Femi, as always. You're a very welcome guest. Coming up, WASPy women will not be receiving compensation, apparently, for the raising of the retirement age, and I'll be telling you what I think of that decision.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good evening to you. Tomorrow will feel colder for all of us. A bit of a damp start in the south and then a mixture of sunshine and showers. Low pressure is dominating, but it's actually sitting up by Iceland. But these weather fronts draped across the UK. This one in particular is doing a couple of things, bringing cloud and rain, but also introducing the colder air. The rain will trickle southwards through this evening across northwest England and Wales. A fairly soggy evening, and that rain spreading into the Midlands and southwest England by the end of the night. The far southeast staying mostly dry, staying pretty mild here, but colder air is arriving across the north. A chillier start here and very gusty winds through the night and indeed for most of Friday, particularly across northern Scotland, but also into the west coast of Scotland. Blustery showers, some snow over the Highlands. Showers elsewhere for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. A dull, damp morning across the southeast, and the rain may linger in Kent well into the afternoon. But elsewhere, it will brighten up. We'll see some sunny spells but it will feel colder. Temperatures only in single figures across the north, maybe 11 or 12 further south, quite a bit chillier than it has been through this week. A cold feeling start to the weekend as well. We may start Saturday dry and bright, but the cloud will bubble up and expect showers on Saturday. Some heavy downpours, rumbles of thunder, hail showers possible as well. And look at the numbers for Saturday. After being in the teens for most of this week, single digits for many of us, it is going to feel a lot chillier.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debate, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Well, we haven't been talking about Matilda, who cried out fire, fire, and they replied little lie. We've actually been talking about the Wiltshire and Dorset Fire Brigade and institutional racism. Jeff writes in to say racism is very serious. When institutions are food are called racist, it makes it seem trivial and makes people tired. Michelle, humans have emotions, institutions do not. Michelle, you're spot on. Christopher, playing with fire, should please stop and search people who don't match the descriptions. It's a very good point. And Martha, the leaders are England, Wales and Scotland are all non-white. That doesn't sound like a racist country to me. That's an absolute superb point, Martha. I wish you'd been speaking to Femi. You would have made that point to him very effectively. An investigation by the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman has recommended that women against state pension inequality, more commonly known as WASPs, are owed compensation at a cost of billions of pounds to you, the taxpayer. The long-awaited report recommended compensation for WASPy women, claiming the government failed adequately to communicate a change in the state pension age. But surely people have some responsibility for their own affairs. Post-pandemic, do we all expect to be spoon-fed by the government, incapable of taking our own decisions? Well, joining me to discuss this is my most intellectual panel, Paul Goodman and Nigel Nelson. Nigel, this was announced in 1995. It came out of a European court judgment that it was discriminatory to have two different retirement ages. It was expected initially that the government would cut the retirement age for men. Instead, it was raised for women, and it was announced that it would be done starting 15 years from the announcement and going on for 10 years beyond that. Don't people have some responsibility for making inquiries about their pension?
Yes, but if they don't know about it in the first place, and this seems to be the nub of what the Ombudsman is saying, that what the DWP didn't do was make it absolutely clear to the women involved that their pensions were going to change. Not enough was made about it in the press either.
But it was widely in the press and on the news.
It became widely in the press much later, but not at the time. Look, but the age group we're talking about, the women born in the 50s, this is my age group, so I knew a lot of these women. They didn't know about it. These were intelligent people. Many of them had never had the letter, didn't understand what was going on. And so why a proper campaign wasn't run to actually tell them what was happening was what the DWP should have done.
If the Chancellor in the budget says tax is going up 2p in the pound, and you don't listen to the budget, and then 2p's taken off your income, should you get it back because you didn't know?
Well, no, not in a situation like that. But what we're talking about is simply communication. And there wasn't enough communication. And then, of course, the goalposts were changed again back in 2011 under the Tories and when they advanced everything
they
2
sped
years.
it up.
Yeah.
And increased it from 65 to 66.
Yeah.
But you can get in touch with the DWP and say, what is my pension going to be?
The argument from the Ombudsman is people tried. There are a number of people had complaints, they weren't sufficiently dealt with. The issue comes down to what you do about it now. My own feeling is this should actually go before the Work and Pension Select Committee to try and work out how that compensation could work. We're talking about phenomenal figures
Billions.
here.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn wanted to compensate everybody fully, and I think that was the best part of £50 billion.
Well, it would be 36 billion if it was at 10,000, but it's still nearly 8 billion if you're talking about 3,000.
Well, we don't have money, do we?
See, as a former MP, I can't help looking at this through a political prism. And what occurs to me thinking about it immediately is that the stronger Labour's position in the polls gets, the worse this kind of problem is for them. And my understanding is today Labour have said nothing about this at all, because there's Rachel Reeves trying to construct a programme that will convince people you can safely elect a Labour government. Suddenly, £30 billion. I know we all chuck these figures around and sometimes don't appreciate the scale of them. This is a heck of a lot of money. Suddenly, she's faced potentially, if Labour win, with paying the bill.
And do you think, the point I was sort of hinting at, that since COVID, we've thought the government will do everything for us, and that this has influenced the Ombudsman, that people seem to expect to take no responsibility for their own circumstances, not even to the point of paying attention to newspapers?
This is pre-COVID.
I think there's...
I know this is, but the Ombudsman has come to his conclusion.
I think there's something in the point about COVID, but actually I pan the camera back, as it were, and think about this more broadly. There has been a general growth in the last 25 years or so in very important judgments being made by courts or by ombudsmen. Nigel and I were having a chat about this before the programme began. Now, this ruling will be widely welcomed, I bet. It'll be welcomed by the WASPy women, and I bet if you polled it, it would be popular. What does worry me about it, and worries you, is that we can't carry on ratcheting up these bills without someone sooner or later having to pay them.
And it's the standard of malfeasance that is required. So with Equitable Life, the FSA had told people to carry on putting money into Equitable, even though it knew it was bankrupt, because it thought if it got lots more money, it might just keep going. That seemed to me a really straightforward case of maladministration. The government takes some responsibility. This is, we're going to do something. It's been announced, it's had some publicity, you didn't know about it, perhaps we could have done a bit more to publicise it, but it's completely different scale from Equitable Life, infected blood, any of these other scandals.
Blood, we've certainly only paid out a few thousand,
which I think is pretty disgraceful. We've been very slow on that. Yeah.
We're not paying any compensation to the gay armed forces veterans who were wrongly jailed or thrown out of the Army, Navy, or Air Force.
And these are much stronger cases.
There is still the Post Office.
And the Post Office is going in the right direction, the Post Office, in fairness, but it takes a TV series to do it. When you mention the word scale, that's absolutely the point here. It's the scale of the number of women who didn't seem to know about this. And this is the bit that gets me. If you have this huge change coming down the track, they would talk amongst themselves. They would hear about what's going on, that a few would get letters, even if some letters went astray. These people did not know, and certainly did not know the implications of what they were getting into, which is why the DWP are at fault, and we've got to do something about now compensating them for the DWP's failure.
I think it's very difficult to make that jump, because it's hard to see what their real loss is by not knowing. If they'd known, they'd still have got a lower pension.
No, I mean, it's not a question of the pensions. It's the fact that you couldn't make provision for those years that you weren't getting the pension. So it may well have been whether you tried to sort out working longer. There were people who suddenly found they couldn't pay the mortgage, ended up living with their families. There was a whole host of things that happened to those women as a direct result of this.
Of not knowing. I mean, there's...
Well, I think surely the central point about all this is the difference in expectations between the world of 1995 and the world of 2024. In the world of 2024, what Nigel is saying makes a lot of sense. You announce more, you do more to tell people what's going on, you have social media to consider, you know, do you have to get your message out by social media? In 1995, it's just a sort of simpler world in which politicians exercise more power and courts and ombudsmen exercise less. And so we've projected back into that world of 1995, 2024 judgments, which is maybe not surprising.
Well, thank you very much to my panel. Now, coming up, the muggles at the Office of Rail and Road have halted the use of the iconic train from Harry Potter, all because of some door hinges. I think it's unhinged. Unhinged door hinges.
Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Gary Lineker 2.0. We expose the BBC star for what looks like outrageous bias. Will the Beeb take him off air? Owen Jones sensationally quits the Labour Party. Is Starmer more doomed than Sunak? More blood on Tony Blair's hands? We expose how people are dying behind bars because of a law he created. And why haven't police arrested the woke activist who slashed the painting of Lord Balfour? His great-grandson, Earl Balfour, joins me live. Don't miss Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do.
Or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because, you know, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it rather than... It's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So...
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Well, there's been a cornucopia of mail mogs this evening. Margaret saying, forget about knife crime, that was Femi. How convenient. Shelley, on the WASPy women says, we didn't know about the changes until it was too late. I was nursing parents. It was expected of me. I didn't have anything to put towards a private pension. But Bronwyn says, I fall into the category of WASPy. I always knew the state pension age was rising long before I was due to retire. I don't understand how so many didn't. I think we've become a country of whingers and whiners who think the government should pay for everything and take no responsibility at all for ourselves. And Nigel Nelson said women didn't know of the change in female pension age decided in 1995. Well, all the women in my family knew and were upset about the delay in their state pensions. Can my relations be the only females who were paying attention? So we're going to have a duel between Nigels, I think, to settle this matter after the programme's ended. The Hogwarts Express, rather splendidly called the Jacobite train service, which is why I like it so much, is best known for ferrying young wizards to Hogwarts in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. But it's been suspended with immediate effect. The suspension centres around the modernisation of the heritage train's locking system that uses old-fashioned door bolts above each door. The trains are run by West Coast Railways, the UK's largest mainline heritage rail operator, which is now taking the UK's rail regulator to court for its decision. It's currently looking at an exemption. But we need the Jacobites to win on this occasion. They may have lost in 1745, but now we need a reversal and Jacobite victory. I've got with me now James Shuttleworth, the commercial manager of West Coast Railways, and my panel is still here too. James, just explain what you're trying to do and what the regulator is doing.
We're not actually taking the regulator to court. I might just correct you on that one. We undertook a judicial review about the process that they used in coming to their determination, but we're not actually taking it to the court. Where we stand at the moment is at the end of a regulation that was introduced about 25 years ago, and it was not designed for the type of trains that we run, charter trains, low density. It was designed for the southeastern commuters. There were concerns about door locks and people jumping off or falling off. Perfectly reasonable position to take, but it does not apply to charters. And we had a system in place, which we've had 2 10-year exemptions, which have been in place, let's say, since 2003. And our second exemption expired last year because the rail regulators said that the time had come that they felt that we should fit central door locking. At the moment, we have stewards who use bolts.
So people can't just open your doors because the stewards have bolted them closed?
Absolutely.
So it's not like when I was a child and you could open the train doors as it was going along?
No, and we don't want people falling out of trains.
And how many people have fallen out over the last 25 years?
None.
None. OK, so this is a theoretical risk.
Yes.
Is it that the regulator just thinks you're a bit of a nuisance because you take up space on the railways and they'd like modern trains going along when they're not on strike rather than steam trains that everybody loves and brings the romance and elegance of the railways back to mind?
Well, West Coast have been doing this. We've had a licence to operate. I mean, one of the oldest continuous operators on the network. We've had a licence since 1998. I mean, we've been doing this. We're not newcomers to this exercise. And the present position, we have submitted a new application. We undertook a judicial review, which we didn't win, but we agreed with the regulator. They said they had an open mind, and we put in a new application addressing the points that they said were not covered. We have spent a lot of time, effort, and money in producing a full risk assessment, and we have submitted it. Now, that takes time to assess. There's no question about that. And what we have asked, and where we stand at the moment, is we said to the regulator, fine, we've done what you've asked us to do. Please give us back the exemption to continue to run the vehicles that we use. Now, that was fine up until January the 10th when they withdrew the previous exemption. So what we've said is, let us continue. This is not forever. This is while we are discussing.
And continuing to make safety improvements which you've made over the years.
And discussing with them how we do it, how we go about it. And so therefore, where we stand at the moment is not about safety, because there are other operators who have similar vehicles that they can run on similar services, yet they have merely committed that at a point in the future they will fit central door locking. The only difference is we haven't committed to that.
OK, so if you committed to it in 30 years' time, you might be all right?
There is that possibility.
Right.
We haven't got to that stage.
Well, let me turn to my panel. Nigel, this is the worst of the bureaucratic blancmange, stopping people having a little bit of fun for very low risk, and people being willing to take a very modest risk for themselves.
Well, had James been on the platform when I was catching the train, I think I might have been talked into it. However, I do go on the health and safety line. I mean, health and safety is something that is constantly improving. And I don't want to fall off a train. I don't want my grandchildren to fall off a train or be at risk. If there is an emergency, I'd rather there was central locking so the driver can unlock all the doors at the same time. I don't want to see anyone getting their clothes caught in it. So when you look purely at health and safety has improved over the years. In the 1930s, that there were 7,000 deaths on the roads. Now there are fewer than 2,000.
All steam trains on that basis, because just the operation of a steam train is more dangerous than an electric train.
Well, we're talking about the doors at the moment.
Yeah.
And what James was saying was that if you made the commitment to actually do something about it, this could be sorted out.
But we don't do this in other things, do we, Paul? Because I drive a 1936 3.5-litre Derby Bentley, which has no seatbelts in it. I'm not required to put in seatbelts because it's accepted that it has to follow the regulations that applied at the time.
I'm just thinking, let's just close Hogwarts. Let's pension off Dumbledore and send Harry Potter back to live with the Dursleys. I'm only partly being satirical about this because there's a human cost to what the regulator appears to be doing. Never mind the financial cost. The human cost is what you referred to in your introduction, which is the sort of joy and romance and pleasure of travelling on the train. And from what we're being told, this decision looks completely out of proportion.
Yeah, and that must be what you feel.
I believe it is. It is proportionate. I mean, you know, the regulation even says that it actually states that it's for fare-paying passengers. So I'm not quite sure what happens to unfair-paying passengers.
The free, so you can invite me on for free and I won't have to be in a line.
Yes.
Should the government do anything?
At the end of the day, the regulator is Her Majesty's Railway Inspectorate hold that card. They also hold the card as to whether they give us that exemption. And it is only right and proper that the safety regulator is there. The government can suggest, or I don't think they can legislate. They can say unless they.
We can always legislate.
Well, they can legislate, or they could remove the particular.
The government always talk to regulators, don't they?
Well, I hope they do.
Are you hoping for some subtle pressure? Come on, Mark Harper. Bring out your inner train spotter and allow the steam trains to steam ahead?
Well, I think it is, at the moment, we're looking at a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Yeah. And I do think that there needs to be some sensible, reasonable discussion. I mean, they could say, yeah, OK, you brought it on yourself, you're just being stubborn. But no, I think there's some reasonableness in this.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope that the blancmange finally gets eaten. No, we haven't had this for a long time, but it's time for Wet Wipe of the Week. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, we expect you to check your privilege. Britain's top spy chief and fruit juice enthusiast, Richard Moore, sent a series of grovelling emails to staff at MI6 after The Guardian revealed his shocking crime of membership of the Garrick Club, which he has now resigned. This wet wipe, first of all, said he was a member to change it from the inside. How gloriously pious, but not particularly credible reason for joining a club. And then he caved in to lefty pressure. Surely people who safeguard this country from foreign enemies are meant to be tough and not blown over by a puff of politically correct wind. Roger Moore is certainly no Richard Moore, or Richard Moore, no Roger Moore. Indeed, he's more likely to be cast as a Bond villain knick-knack rather than Jaws. We can at least be certain he wouldn't be Blofeld, because Blofeld was a member of Boodles. Thank you very much to my panel and to James. That's all from me. Up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, Keir Starmer is in much more trouble than the establishment media would lead you to believe. We expose a Gary Lineker 2.0 stalking the corridors of the BBC. And I have Lord Balfour's relative on to talk about two-tier policing, still no arrests after his painting was slashed with a Stanley knife.
Well, that's absolutely appalling. We can't have pictures of former Tory Prime Ministers being slashed. It'll be a very interesting programme as always. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And you want to know about the weather? Well, I can tell you in Chard it'll be fantastic, because that's just turned out to be the best town in the country. And it's in Somerset, of course.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Good evening to you. Tomorrow will feel colder for all of us. A bit of a damp start in the south and then a mixture of sunshine and showers. Low pressure is dominating, but it's actually sitting up by Iceland. But these weather fronts draped across the UK. This one in particular is doing a couple of things, bringing cloud and rain, but also introducing the colder air. The rain will trickle southwards through this evening across northwest England and Wales. A fairly soggy evening, and that rain spreading into the Midlands and southwest England by the end of the night. The far southeast staying mostly dry, staying pretty mild here, but colder air is arriving across the north. A chillier start here and very gusty winds through the night and indeed for most of Friday, particularly across northern Scotland, but also into the west coast of Scotland. Blustery showers, some snow over the Highlands. Showers elsewhere for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. A dull, damp morning across the southeast, and the rain may linger in Kent well into the afternoon. But elsewhere, it will brighten up. We'll see some sunny spells, but it will feel colder. Temperatures only in single figures across the north, maybe 11 or 12 further south, quite a bit chillier than it has been through this week. A cold feeling start to the weekend as well. We may start Saturday dry and bright, but the cloud will bubble up, and expect showers on Saturday. Some heavy downpours, rumbles of thunder, hail showers possible as well. And look at the numbers for Saturday. After being in the teens for most of this week, single digits for many of us, it is going to feel a lot chillier.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still time to win our giveaway packed with seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won. Cash to make your bank account bloom. Plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March.